I'm Barbara Mead. I'm one of the founders of Politics and Prose, and I came in especially this evening because I told Grace that I rushed to be first in line to sign up for introducing her because I first of all, that I wanted so badly to meet her. I have never met Grace. I have read her. I read her poetry. I read her poetry reviews. I've listened to her on the radio, but I have never met her. So I get to do three things this evening. I get to listen to her read. I get to introduce her, but most of all, I get to meet her. That's the greatest pleasure. If I told you everything that Grace has accomplished in her life, there will be no time for Grace to talk. So I'm going to try to keep this abbreviated. Grace, very early in her career, was a founder of the Washington Writers Publishing House. She's also founded two poetry presses. She's the author of 16 books of poetry, books and chapbooks. If that's not enough, that she's written 26 plays that have been produced for the American stage. And on top of that, that she's accomplished what I feel is the impossible. He's been not only a writer, but a critic, a literary critic as well. Then on top of that, from 1977 to 1997, Grace produced and hosted The Poet and the Poem on Radio Pacifica. And in that 20 years that she presented some 2,000 poets. That program now has continued on National Public Radio from the Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. And for that she has won an award from a silver medal award from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. Grace has won so many awards I couldn't even begin to list them. But I'll just give you the highlights of them. In 2015, she was she received the inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award from the Washington Independent Review, which she's a monthly columnist for, and poetry reviewer. She has received the Folger Shakespeare Library's Columbia Award. Twice she's been the recipient of the Allen Ginsberg Award. And she has also been the, I'm sorry, if I lost one thing here. What did, and something I missed on here, Grace, tell me. Well, I just... It's too much to tell me because you've just done so many things. I mean, I'm just so impressed, and I enjoyed the book so much, and it was so nice to, in the pages of the book, to run into so many old friends within the pages. Grace has just had a spectacular career, and there's so many people in this room and all over Washington who have been so grateful to her for everything she's done. So, Grace, I welcome you so much to Politics and Prose.
Thank you so much. After that, it's called Standing in the Gold. Thank you so much, Barbara. This is the book, Life Upon the Wicked Stage, and it is a story about life in the arts, in poetry and theater and broadcasting and production and teaching, but it's really a memoir of a marriage because my husband was a great metal sculptor and we were two art spirits who were married. So that is braided through the book. And because of that, I'm going to start with meeting him. But I want to take a moment before I do that to say that Politics and Prose is in every writer's DNA. It is in our bloodstream. It is what keeps us going. And to be here is the greatest honor of all my reading that that I've ever done. So thank you so much. And I see other publishers here. Alan Squire is here, and WordWorks is here, and the place is jumping. So this is about meeting Ken, and it's chapter 3, and it's called In the End, There Is a Beginning. Today, I opened a brown envelope holding a permanent pass to Arlington National Cemetery, where I can visit Ken's columbarium. Although I know he's not in that steel and cement encasement, still, the plastic announcement hurt and left me dizzied. There's no way I can encapsulate almost 60 years of marriage with a naval aviator, race car driver, metal sculptor. Yet I've spent 1 year since his death trying to, in a book of poems, The Man Who Got Away. So I'll just tell about meeting him as a crossing guard at junior high school number 3, where he later would say he joined the Navy because of the way I liked him in uniform. So he took me on my first date. I was 14. We went to the Strand Theater, not far from my house on Hermitage Avenue, across from the library I loved so much. I wore a suit with a peplum jacket. I think it was green. The movie was Ivy with Joan Fontaine. I was so afraid of the body and afraid its uncertainties would represent me that I dared not swallow for 2 hours. This is not a metaphor. I did not swallow the saliva in my mouth for 2 hours. And the agony of it, the terror. What did all this anxiety portend? That there would be something about me unacceptable? That I was basically an animal with fluids in her mouth? A flat-chested person with spit in her mouth wearing a green peplum? Not the goddess that he thought I was when he took my hand. When the lights went on and we stood up and the chairs squeaked, I swallowed. We didn't know then how to invent ourselves. Remember, at that time we didn't own TV sets, which could tell us how to act, what we should look like, how to achieve fake safety in this artificial world. Then he'd leave me in my senior year of high school to go to Australia with his parents. Then he would leave again to go to Lehigh University. Then he'd leave again to go into the Naval Cadet Flying Program. Then he would leave to be on 9 carriers. And today, I have a pass where I can visit him anytime I want. He always came home to me. At the end of each chapter, I have a poem from a previous book, and this is a poem from The Man Who Got Away, and it's 1952. There you sit in the open cockpit. I never saw such a smile. Goggles pushed up on your head, shoulders harnessed with a parachute to keep you safe. This would be before you were on 9 carriers, before exile to Vietnam, before your children surrounded you like stars, waiting for your kiss, before the autumns of our lives, before there would be no autumns, before I said, don't fly away, before you would become someone else, then back again, before there would be so much sun outside without you, before the winds were light and variable, before you'd sit on the front step every time I went to the store, waiting for my return. There you are, sitting in a cockpit of an SNJ, smiling at me for all eternity, in a moment that could not last, cleared for flight, everything in the whole blue world ahead of you. Well, I've had 26 plays produced, it is true. Most of them, many were short form, some were long, full lengths, but Ken is the one who got me started writing plays. My husband said, you will write plays. I said, oh, please. He said, you will. Just wait and see. It's just acting on paper. In 1966, Ken received orders to be stationed at the Bureau of Navy Personnel, Washington, D.C. It was shore duty, and that was always lovely for me. We arrived at Annandale, Virginia from Whidbey Island, Washington, having traveled across country in a small 26-foot trailer with me in a cast broken ankle, tennis, a 2-year-old Angel in the midst of toilet training, Shelley and Colleen, 7 years, and Cindy, age 10. I just want to tell you that Angel got it down by the time we got to Utah. She's very smart. The Beatles had landed, and everything was pink and orange, and the Cultural Revolution had moved the earth. I was writing poems daily, and I was always waiting by the mailbox for any interest. Ken said, selling poems is just like selling used cars, 1 in 8. 1 in 8? Right. A salesman will make 1 sale out of every 8. I sent out 8 poems a day. This was before computers, and when poems came back, I retyped them and sent them out again, like gifts to the world. And damn, by a year's end, I had 13 poems accepted in 13 very good literary magazines. But think of the numbers. Exponentially, how many had been typed and sent out? At that time, in 1968, we saw an ad in the Baltimore paper announcing a playwriting contest in a new theater, the Corner Theater Cafe. Ellen Stewart, the great theater master from New York, came down and opened this theater for us. Well, this was the revolution at my doorstep, and no one apparently knew or cared that I was a suburban Navy housewife. So I did enter that. I won that contest, and I want to tell you, there's nothing like winning to keep on writing. I wrote about 10 plays in the next couple of years, and then my first full length was in Baltimore in 1972, and I will just tell you how that happened. Notre Dame was an all-girls college in Baltimore, and that was known nationally for its theater and media department. This was an era when nuns actually wore habits, which drove my sculptor husband crazy because the art teacher would teach welding with the flame right next to her sleeve. The Mother Superior called me one day about the college's decision to do my play. It was a world-shaking phone call. I see just where I stood in the kitchen, holding the wall phone, when I heard that well-modulated voice. Sister asked for Miss Cavalieri. And with great dignity and appropriate nun-like pauses, Sister said, "The board has met about your play, and after careful decision and much debate, we have decided to allow the use of fuck and shit in the script." Thank you, Sister, I said respectfully. Nothing was said about the attack on Catholicism's obsessional practices, which was the play's premise. Now, Best of Friends then won an award, and it traveled the country. But at the same time, in 1972, I got a play in New York, and I really thought I was a playwright. But another reality check. In 72, I was to have the thrill of my life, or I thought so anyway. The WPA Theater in New York accepted a play called Getting Ready, about an alcoholic couple. Now, WPA is still thriving as one of the premier cutting-edge theaters in New York. Now that I look back on that play, I realize that what critics once said of E.E. Cummings' play, watching it is like every once in a while stepping on something nasty in the dark. I see that many of my one acts were an attempt to break down boundaries where women were told they could speak on stage only what was spoken in the living room and not the bedroom. In the privacy of a writing room, it's effortless to express our conduct. But when you see it coming back at you on stage, every expletive is 10 times bigger and louder than on paper. I didn't know this yet. And we went off to New York. I had black stockings and an armful of silver bracelets. I was going to be a playwright. And the big sign in front of the theater, I don't know how many of you remember Joe Orton, the great English playwright. The big marquee said, "Joe Orton, and an American playwright." That was me. I had been collaborating with a great artist, Mary Ellen Long, in California, and she illustrated some of my books. And so I got her silk screens, which were extremely valuable, and had them framed as gifts for the artists. So the grandparents came down to take care of the kids, and off we went. The play was tough, and these were cynical times that suited it. After the show, after the audience filed out, I went to the box office to say, I'm the playwright. May I meet the actors? I have the gifts. Oh, they're gone, said the guy. I told them I was coming. Yeah, they left after the show. They always do. I handed over the works of art, by now collector's items, and said, well, please give them these gifts from me as thanks for their work. Will do, he said, and we headed home. I don't want to make it appear as if all of my plays had terrible beginnings, but there were a couple I have to share. And Pinecrest Rest Haven was a book of poems published by WordWorks, which I changed into a play, and it was in New York, but it opened on 9/11, not to good reviews. So that was not a good opening. That did come back again, but I learned a lesson, and that was not to get my expectations too high. I was commissioned by, I think when you have a memoir, you're allowed to say I all the time. I was commissioned by the Smithsonian Institution and Visual Library Press at the University of Maryland to write a play about Harriet Powers. Now, she was the great quilt maker, the ex-slave quilt maker, who sold her quilt for half the asking price of $5. And she had spent her life making this, and it was my job to find out why a woman would have done such a thing that she spent her whole life on. And this was a production I loved very much. So the Smithsonian brought her down. Harriet Powers has quilts in the Boston Museum of Art and the Smithsonian, and she has been discovered as a great genius. So the Smithsonian brought the New York cast down. I never did anything to harm anyone. So I don't know why destiny chose me to play its tricks when my plays open. But on the very night of this grand event, a crazy farmer drove his tractor full of explosives up from some beleaguered southern farm to protest a congressional farm bill, and he parked it in the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. Constitution Avenue was cordoned off, and the buses from black churches were canceled. And my daughter Shelley, coming in from Virginia, couldn't even make the event. The auditorium was filled somehow, but many others were unable to attend, but we went on with the reading. Now, after I got very high on Harriet Powers, and I started writing books about women, books of poems, and then I would take the characters and put them on stage. And then I got into Mary Wollstonecraft, who was that 18th century author, the first woman to write a serious book in English. And she was my hero. So I wrote about her. And my husband said he never knew who was coming down for breakfast. I had first slave narrative talk, and then I had an English accent. But after Mary Wollstonecraft, there was nowhere to go but Anna Nicole Smith. Because I loved her. You remember her? She was the celebrity who had, she had some problems. She married a billionaire, and then she had a baby, and it was up for grabs who the father was. And she died of an overdose. But I still loved her because I saw the beauty that could have been there. And it was a great reading. New York has a lot of big blondes, but we found the clone for Anna Nicole Smith. I had all the stage characters already there in the book of poems. I had the crass manager, the would-be lover, those tugging on her celebrity without true commitment. So there was nothing to do but stand them up on stage and let them slug it out in front of us. I added one crucial element because theater needs conflict, where poetry does not. I imagined Anna having a twin sister, Anima, who died at birth, but followed Anna through life, cursing her good luck for surviving and causing the addictions and failures that Anna endured. Now, although the first night is usually not the best for a play's rhythm, I still loved it and adored Mary Riley, who played Anna, and fell in love with Anna Nicole and her bruised heart all over again. Shayla, the director, had done a fabulous job getting designers, and in one scene, Anna wore a dress made entirely of flowers. Now, who remembers Sandy, the hurricane? The next few days were a wipeout. The subways were flooded. Broadway was dark, and us along with it. All tickets were refunded, and I sat stunned and numb at the curious turn of events. It was to be a 2-week showcase run, hoping to entice producers. And the actors after that had other jobs to go to, and of course the show was ended. I did not say doomed, because it's never doomed, not as long as I brought a person to life from paper who will live longer than I will, and may see the light again someday. Once I had a dream that Anna held me against her, and the energy and electricity was beyond earthly understanding. I know that her spirit, ridiculed on earth, is seen for much more beauty in that land where the dead now live. I'm going to flash forward here to the German embassy. Now, from 1970 to 75, I was setting up writing programs at Antioch's East Coast College. Then at 75, I quit Antioch to raise money to put WPFW on the air. And so that took 2 years of fundraising, and we went on air in 1977. But finally, I thought, I've been playing in the sandbox and having a good time, but I've got to make some money. So I needed a straight job. And luckily, I landed at PBS. So this is the German embassy, and think where you were in 1980. I loved my job at PBS. I was the Associate Director of Education and Children's Programming from 1978 to 1982, in charge of the daytime schedule. I had the supernova program Sesame Street, lighting up the sky, taken by 100% of the PBS stations. Many other countries were also taking the series, some illegally, but there was no way to police this. However, an invitation came to our department for a cocktail party at the German embassy. It was a magnificent large building, and we had stimulating, if superficial, conversational moments with guests about television and children. Everyone was interested in PBS and its reach and significance. It was fun. Ken, an artist, my husband, he wandered from room to room admiring the gorgeous hangings and sculpture and said, much too loudly, I'm afraid, "How in the world did you people ever manage to smuggle all these things out of East Germany without getting slaughtered?" He went on, I cringe to say, with some more jokes on the subject, but no one was laughing. In fact, the room fell dead, dead, silent. Ken and I looked at each other. We never analyzed the invitation. GDR? The German Democratic Republic? How could we have confused it with FRG, the Federal Republic of Germany? So many consonants in the abbreviation. So few vowels. We were in the East German embassy, and our popularity dissolved like a frozen vodka in hell. Once the cocktail party chatter resumed, we got our coats and quietly, very quietly, stole away. Now, as this book crosses back and forth across time, as memory is not chronological, and certainly our lives are not sequential in thought, then I just wrote it as it came to me. So now chapter 31, we're back to 1966. And this was a momentous occasion. It was my first poetry grant. What bothered me most was spending Ken's earnings on my art. After settling into Annandale, Virginia from the West Coast, 1966, I was writing every day and sending poems out to magazines and also focusing on small stages for my first plays. Money was limited, but our life was prosperous and brimming with color and colorful people. Yet I worried about my piece taken from the pie, Was it too large? I contributed nothing materially to our income. I was mailing every day to literary journals and theaters, perhaps a few $100s a year allotted to furthering myself. We could add an extra zero to that these days. The D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities professed to support artists, so I wrote them a letter requesting support. The commission at that time had no mechanism for funding individual artists, and I had but a few publications and a host of dreams, a thin resume. Oddly enough, I received a call asking me to meet with the council to submit my case in person. Well, the D.C. Commission was filled with many stern and august persons around this large oval table, and I was asked why the urgency and intensity of my letter demanding that the commission develop a resource for individual artists. I said I had 4 children. I spoke of my endeavors. I admitted I was at the beginning of my career and needed assistance. This was the height of the Cultural Revolution, where women were burning their bras. And here I had to be driven into D.C. from Annandale by my husband. The room was disdainful. One member actually said, "So what are you, some kind of suburban housewife artist?" I shouted, "I am an artist." A black guy, a sculptor, stood up in the back and raised his arms in a fisted salute and said, "Yes." I received $200. The council began a plan to fund individual artists, and to this day has a full-blown system that does important work. But forget the postage. With that $200, I bought a maxi coat. A beautiful, long, black coat with a huge collar, just like Janis Joplin wore. If they wanted an artist instead of a housewife, they'd get one. Well, I am at the Library of Congress right now, and for 18 years, I have been at the library, and for 20 years before that, I was at WPFW. So, yes, give me that. I'm now at the Library of Congress, and I've been there for 18 years. Before that, it was WPFW for 20 years. So there was a time, though, that I was overlapping. And this is 38 years now, uninterrupted. As my husband would say, who can interrupt her? But, however, sometimes I have interviewed all the poets laureate of the United States since 1986, when Congress designated the term poet laureate from poetry consultant. So I've had quite a roller coaster ride with all the laureates. And so I'll just tell you about one of them, which was Anthony Hecht. And he came in 1982 until 1984. He came into the library, and we had a curious beginning. He had just moved to a fine house on Nebraska Avenue near American University with his wife and a small son at the time, and I was to conduct him to WPFW to be on air. I picked him up and took him first to dinner at the Hawk and Dove on Capitol Hill. He asked if he could order steak, which I thought was strange, asking permission. At this time, I was going through a personal crisis. Unlike many who go inward with their troubles, I tend to fill the air with them. One of our in-laws was locked in his apartment and would not let us enter. We were frantic and were planning a family intervention. I was inconsolable, and Hecht in his bow tie looked more and more like a frightened rabbit, listening attentively, and he must have thought, is this what a poet laureate must endure, dinner with a nut job? The evening must have had every star out of alignment. After dinner, we had what I thought was a wonderful time on radio with his poetry that is really immortal. I was getting my balance back. Anthony Hecht, I never felt privileged to call him Tony after this evening, read his John Clare poems. Now, these poems about the great prodigal poet refer to gypsies. Somehow, a listener walking through a room somewhere got it out of context and found a racial equivalent to gypsies in her mind. Who would have imagined this? Who could have prevented it? The listeners called in usually to talk to our featured guest, and usually callers called in with words of praise and questions about where to buy the book and wishes for a successful laureateship. This woman blasted Hecht for being a racist, and more that I cannot even say. Anthony Hecht was so shaken when he got off the phone. First, dinner with a hysteric, then a humiliation, a rash of insults on his first public appearance in Washington. Let me say, I was heartbroken. When my book Creature Comforts came out, WordWorks, I inscribed a copy to Anthony, and years later found it abandoned in the poetry office. Who could blame him for not wanting memories of that unsettling night? I was able to make it up to him when I was putting Voices and Visions on the air from NEH, and we were able to honor him at that time, but I never was able to call him Tony. A couple more things. I told you that my husband was a sculptor, and he was a great metal sculptor, and he was actually patented a way of dripping bronze on steel and burning the wood out so that the metal is lace and light comes through it. And this is a poem called The Art of Discard from The Man Who Got Away. And it's a conversation that was almost verbatim. The poem is called Said the Sculptor to the Writer. Somebody wants what you're writing, but nobody cares if I sit hour after hour dripping molten bronze on hot steel. I don't care. It's the watching I want, the way I hold my hand so still. If I wait too long, the metal will melt. If I move too quickly, the bronze will harden. I live for this, the watching, the moment to touch bronze to steel, the second to pull it back. If I move too quickly, the bronze will harden. If I wait, the steel will melt. All you need is a pencil. I have leather, masks, rods, machines, sanders, polishers, fire. You can hide your rejects in a drawer. Mine stand in front of me, larger than I am, gleaming and incomplete. What do you have faith in? He asked me. I have faith in failure, he said, then making it beautiful, something that will last. I'm going to finish with a poem and a remark. This is a poem from my book, Anna Nicole Smith Poems, and it's called Anna's Estate. At the half-star hotel, the lower lip is painted bigger to match her dreams of being a star. She blessed the lumpy beds, bought her own silk sheets. This was before the moral issues, the legal issues, the spirit of the law, the letter of the law, the causes of death, junkies, drug addicts, probable criminal cause, bodies exhumed, frozen sperm, mystery sons, living in sorrow, wrongful deaths, undue influences, before the opalescent oceans where she could never find the truth in things, where she wanted a photo album so bad so she wouldn't die without memories. One night, one day, standing at the free continental breakfast, dragging her sleeve in the jelly, someone walked by, touching her waist like a prayer, like an enfranchisement, and she was on her way in a dress made for someone much smaller. Trusting a stranger because he said, the good Lord can't see what happens in Hollywood. And finally, there's one play I wrote which was produced at the Corner Theater in the 1960s. It had characters in drag. It was hilarious, but I can't remember the title or what became of it. I don't even have the script anymore. I just know it was so funny that I sat laughing in the front row until the man behind me said, that lady sure does like this play. before I end, I would like my publisher to stand up, the beautiful Anna Lawton, publisher of New Academia, who has made this possible. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming.
Okay, I'm telling Grace she can't go anyplace because we got about 15 or 20 minutes that we can have questions. So Grace has got up here. We have 2 microphones. We have one here, and Grace is, as you can see, that Grace is full of answers for everything that you have, every question you have.
First of all, I want to say, Grace, thank you for writing this book. It's an amazing journey through 100 lives. I mean, one person to have done and accomplished all that you have accomplished. But because I know you, I know you're holding back some things. So what is your next book going to be?
I think it might be a compilation of things by Alan Squire, which would be the Grace Cavalieri Reader. Hopefully. And now that I said you have to do it, Rosie. No. I felt Ken wanted me to write this book, and I couldn't imagine why, because prose is certainly not my forte. But after I wrote it, I was really glad, because the girls finally knew where I was. They said, oh, that's where you were. Were you at Antioch when you were at graduate school, or were you teaching at WPFW when you were at PBS? So now everyone knows it's a catalog. It's a catalog, that's all. But afterwards I realized that it really spans the arts in Washington from 1966 to the present, with our small presses and all of our little poetry readings that have now just proliferated. So I'm glad to. Thanks, Karen. She's published 2 of my books. Any other questions? The beautiful Fred Foote, Dr. Foote.
That was lovely.
Medic Against Bomb.
And thanks for all your mentorship. How do you keep tabs with contemporary drama, and what trends have you noticed?
Oh, that's really excellent. That's really interesting, because to write poetry, you just have to read poetry. But to write for theater, you really have to see theater. And for years, I reviewed theater in Washington for 20 years. And now it's been a little harder. I'm still adjusting without Ken, who was my valet and got me everywhere. But I have kept up with it. And I do think that the Contemporary American Theater Festival in West Virginia, I just came back from and reviewed, is cutting edge. And I am thrilled with the fact that there are women playwrights. I have to tell you, in 1966, there were really very few women writing for the stage. I didn't even realize it till I started writing the book. And now, of course, when you see that the Contemporary American Theater Festival always has half of their plays are by women playwrights. So I don't stop. I love the theater and I love poetry, and I'm just going to keep on going until, I'm on a walker. Thank you, Fred. Medic Against Bomb. There's my boyfriend, Glenn.
So public radio is great, and PBS is great, but I didn't hear you mention the NEH. You mentioned the District Council of Arts and Humanities. I want to know how you got a grant from Annandale, Virginia, from the District of Columbia Arts and Humanities.
They never asked. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I think that they did not have a mandate. They did not have a policy. They did not have a strategy. They did not have a plan. And I came in and I said, I'm an artist. I need money. And I was convincing enough, and they just gave me the money. So it was just an anomaly, truly. But the National Endowment for the Humanities came after PBS and before whatever happened after that. And Glenn had the desk next to me. And it was terrible because they were all scholars. And I was the only one without a PhD. And I had come from media, which actually some of them thought I was a little sparkling butterfly. Another thought I was a flaky poet. It was extremely difficult to fit in there.
But Steve Rabin knew that you had what it took.
And I did, by the way. And so Glenn was we were at NEH, and then he went to PBS, and then I went to NEH. But we did wonderful things together. I did the first thing as a children's program director was to produce Big Bird at the Metropolitan Museum. And it was a marvelous thing with NEA, in concert with NEA. And it had Big Bird locked in the museum, and he looked at all the wonderful artifacts. It was a great show. Bill Bennett, who was our head at that time, was extremely upset about this because he felt that it was not measurable content. Preschool children, it was very difficult. The humanities has very important strictures where you really have to measure your humanities content. So that was my first disappointment, really. But children's programming did get funded. It never had been before. And all the people that I had produced at PBS were lining up at the door now to get money. And it was a lot of fun, especially eating lunch with Glenn and listening to his love life, which has stopped. He's just gotten married.
I've been married for 8 years. That's what.
Yeah, but you were the most eligible bachelor at any age. Was this not
Well, I think I was the only straight single man there.
Are you editing this? Please. How many more of my friends are going to say something embarrassing?
Looking forward, I have a question in two parts. Let us presume that properly and appropriately on January 1st you become the Librarian of Congress.
I don't have the clothes for it.
What would you do new and different for the poetry program? What will you do new and different for the other parts of the library?
What a great, no one has ever asked me a serious question in my life. They just think I'm a dingbat. I, first of all, think the poetry department is very effective there and extremely efficient. And I must say it's a big improvement over the last 30 years. Right, Myra? And they even answer the phone. But I think they do marvelous programs. I think the children's addition to the Library of Congress is really heart-filling. They're going to have a children's ambassador, a children's poet laureate, and it is just a wonderful innovation there. I'm thrilled with it. I think I would do more theater. I think the playwrights are really, like Rodney Dangerfield says, we don't get no respect. Because even Poets and Writers, the magazine doesn't feature playwrights. And most places, NEA will not fund playwrights and theaters. So we're kind of second citizens. I would have the Library of Congress emphasize theater more because it has a great humanistic context. It is really the story of cultures, and it is the American experience. Nothing encapsulates ideas as well as theater. Poetry is about feelings, but theater is about ideas, and that I think is missing from the library. Thank you. Does anyone else have any grandiose plans?
Any other questions?
I guess we're done.
No, I guess not. Well, Grace, thank you.
Thank you,
very,
Barbara.
very much.